Davante Adams can't stop praising Lamar Jackson ahead of the Ravens and Raiders Week 2 showdown. We talk about that. Dive into a crossover Thursday. All that and more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen. Each and every day, we're free and available for you all podcasting platforms. That includes video form, where you can like and subscribe, audio form. You can follow along as well for 5 days a week of Baltimore Ravens coverage, plus live edition episodes after Ravens games, game day episodes breaking down the upcoming matchups, and a lot more. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens on Crossover Thursday is brought to you by PrizePicks and presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. We have a lot to dive into today. We're going to have a crossover Thursday with your boy Q of Locked On Raiders, breaking down everything, the biggest matchups, key storylines, and other things to watch in that matchup between Baltimore and Las Vegas. We'll also dive into Davante Adams and his comments on Lamar Jackson, essentially saying that he watched Lamar film to get better in multiple different aspects of his games and called him the best ball carrier ever, alongside some other compliments, which we'll get into throughout the entire episode. So without any further ado, let's now dive into our conversation with your boy Q of Locked On Raiders. Q, both these teams 0-1. Both these teams losing to AFC West opponents as the Ravens lost to the Chiefs. And then obviously the Raiders, a divisional battle with the Chargers, they fall. How are you feeling about this game? Because the Ravens are looking for a bounce back, but in this case, so are the Raiders.
Yeah, this is going to be a real pivotal game, and obviously it's going to be a huge challenge for the Raiders going on the road, taking on Baltimore. Obviously, Baltimore, I don't have to tell you, in the AFC Championship game just a year ago and put up a hell of a performance against the Chiefs, just fell a little short on Thursday Night Football. And, you look at the Raiders and what they were able to do against the Chargers, and I think this is really more about the story of what they weren't able to do, and that was get their offense going. Their defense was something that we knew was going to be the strength of the team this year, but the offense had to complement them. The offense had to put them in a position where, okay, they're not on the field the whole game, and when they do get a 3-out, when they do get a punt, they're able to get down the field and get some points. Well, the Raiders only end up with 10 points on Sunday versus the Chargers, so clearly the offense was not clicking, as a lot of the offenses around the league weren't, week one, and that's kind of expected because of preseason and lack of preseason play. But there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of new with the Raiders. Gardner Minshew is the quarterback. No one's ever going to mistake him for an elite quarterback. He's a guy that's good enough to get it done, but is good enough to get it done good enough for this week, right? I mean, that's going to be the big question. Can him and Davante continue to grow their chemistry, get on the same page? Brock Bowers, the rookie, he looks as advertised. Can he continue to grow with that chemistry? And I talk about all these weapons. I talk about the quarterback and, these playmakers. Kevin, it all starts up front, man. If the offensive line cannot block, it's not going to matter what the weapons look like on the outside, because Minshew won't have enough time to throw the ball. If the offensive line can't block, it doesn't matter, because the running game is not going to get going. And for the Raiders to have success, they have to have a run game. They have to have some resemblance of a run game so they can open up everything else. Play action, pass, just even running the ball and keeping the Ravens or any other opponent on the sideline. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why they need to have a run game, but it's all going to start with the big boys up front. So the Raiders aren't 100% healthy with that offensive line. Their rookie that they selected in the second round, Jackson Powers-Johnson, he didn't play week one. He was inactive. I'm probably thinking he's going to be inactive this week as well. They've got Cody Whitehair, the longtime veteran, there at the left guard position next to Colton Miller, and they just got to continue to gel. So this game is really going to come down to, in my opinion, what the offensive line could do for the Raiders and really the trenches in general, which, as you know, most football games do come down to the trenches.
Yeah, and for the Ravens, that's a big storyline as well. But I know for the Raiders, Q, you mentioned that Gardner Minshew, Davante Adams connection. And by the way, Davante Adams was glowing about Lamar Jackson earlier in the day on Wednesday, talking about Lamar and how he's the greatest ball carrier ever. And we're going to dive into that more a little bit in the second part of the show. But for you, with that Minshew connection with Davante, obviously him getting on the same page with guys like Jacoby Myers and even other receivers, you mentioned Brock Bowers. What's your confidence level through week one of the Gardner Minshew experience?
I mean, I don't think he was, the sole reason why the Raiders lost, right? I think that he did a decent job. Could it have been better? Sure, right? There was a couple times he could have hit Davante, probably would have been bigger gains, but again, the offensive line didn't really do their share of the heavy lifting. And so at some point it felt like Gardner Minshew was getting a little bit of gun shy, a little happy feet back there in the pocket and wasn't allowing plays to develop, but still was able to connect with Davante on about 5 passes. They still had a pretty decent connection. There was one pass that Davante pointed out when he was on the Up and Adams show, on K Adams show, and was talking about, he threw that with anticipation and just knew that I was going to be there. So he trusts me to be where I need to be and trust that he can get the ball where it needs to go. So I do believe that they're building this. But the other thing about this situation, as the Raiders had a quarterback competition in training camp, they were splitting reps, the first team reps with Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. And then on top of that, Davante left for the birth of his baby. So he wasn't even in training camp for the full training camp, didn't do any preseason work. So this is all new. It is all just still now trying to get on the same page and get that chemistry with each other. And so that's the unfortunate part of this, when they could have probably worked on this and got on the same page if the Raiders didn't have a quarterback competition, but they did. If Davante was there for all of training camp, but he wasn't. And if he did get a little bit of burn in the preseason and he didn't, right? So, I mean, all those things are working against them, but I do believe that this could continue to build. And I felt pretty positive after week 1 that, okay, they're going to find a way to get on the same page, both Minshew and Davante Adams.
And now they both go up against the Ravens secondary that boasts players such as Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Stevens, Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Williams. So really big, although even though Davante is now the hot topic in Baltimore and Q, a lot of Ravens fans are saying, Las Vegas, you want to slide him over Baltimore's way. If you want to bring him over here.
Kevin, let me tell you, ever since the Raiders acquired Davante Adams, somebody somewhere, some fan base has been trying to trade for Davante. Like, get Davante out of Vegas. From the minute he touched down in Las Vegas, he just probably signed the dotted line on his house. All of a sudden, they're like, man, got to get that guy out of there. The Jets have been begging for him. Other teams have been begging. I'm not saying Baltimore is, but that's funny that you mentioned that the fan base is like, well, hey, go on and bring Davante here. So look, when you're a great player like that and you look at a team that could be potentially struggling, I get it. But it's just so funny how many fan bases and how many times I've heard, hey, what about Davante? Is he available? So, he's not available yet. Right? We'll see how the rest of the season goes, but he ain't available right now.
Yeah, might have to check in with you closer to the deadline about that one to see how that goes. But hey, when Davante says something, again, he said for Lamar, dude changed the game. He's the best ball carrier ever, no matter what position. I don't think anybody's as big of a threat to carry the football. Hey, that's super high praise for Lamar, which we'll again get into later in the show. But Q, defensively for the Raiders, you mentioned a little bit about that as well. Former Raven J.K. Dobbins goes, wild on the Raiders defense. Couple of big runs, had a touchdown as well. What are your biggest storylines for that unit? You kind of alluded to it a tad earlier, but when you look at this group, they added Christian Wilkins and a couple of others. They obviously have Max Crosby, who's a game wrecker. What are you looking at there?
Well, I'll say this, man. The defense is as advertised. And for 3/4 of the game, maybe a little bit more than 3/4 of the game on Sunday versus the Chargers, they were fine. They were, the strength of the team, and they were making life difficult on Justin Herbert. And the run game wasn't going for the Chargers until it was. It literally was about 4 plays. 4 big plays from the Chargers run game that opened everything up. And, you look at the box score and you see how many yards Dobbins went for. But again, like I said, it was very few plays that helped create that. It's just, the dam broke. It just ended up becoming, they were out there on the field too long. It was hot in LA and the Raiders offense was not complimenting them at all. So the defense is really good. Now, this is an interesting animal coming up, in this game, right? This is a big challenge because Lamar Jackson is not your average quarterback who's just going to sit back in the pocket and maybe move around just a little bit. I mean, there's so many different ways that Todd Monken and the Ravens could use Lamar Jackson, and especially with the addition of Derrick Henry, it's going to be interesting to see how Patrick Graham and Rob Leonard, how they really try to get this defense to have a good stout game plan to stop the run, which they did a good job of for the most part against the Chargers, but also limit Lamar on those big plays, especially the breakdown plays. Like, it's one thing when it's a designed run, but it's another when you do like 95% of the play right, and then all of a sudden he breaks contain and there's a lot of grass in front of him, and it's like, uh-oh, right? Because he's so dynamic. He's one of those that you almost get worried until, if you're an opposing fan, you almost get worried until he's literally on the ground or out of bounds, because you know that he can make so many things happen with his legs. And so, it's going to be interesting to see if the discipline is there for the Raiders defense, if, guys like Crosby don't end up going too far up the field and like I said, not having contained there. And on the other side, that's another thing to look at, right? Malcolm Kuntz isn't there. He's on IR. He's out 4 weeks. Tyree Wilson probably won't play. He was a former first-round pick, so they got guys like Charles Snowden, Janarius Robinson. Those guys, do they have the discipline to be able to just kind of, create that pocket and try to sink it in, as opposed to all of a sudden letting there be a breakout or a leak out spot for Lamar? Because if he has a leak out, even if he doesn't, he has a chance to break one. But if he does, then it's even more dangerous. So I really want to see how they implement their pass rush and their run stopping defense against them, Lamar and Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and that's a big point too, because you're right. Lamar can be so frustrating in that way. You think you have him, he just kind of goes one way, and he had like that as a likely touchdown week 1 against Kansas City on the move.
Yep.
In the pocket, you don't want to leave him there and just let him be a pocket passer. But if he's on the move, he gets dangerous as well. But you mentioned some of the injuries, Q, for the Raiders. How's their report looking in general? You mentioned a couple of guys, but are there any others to look out for?
Well, I mean, just the offensive linemen, to me, seeing, Wednesday's injury report and seeing Colton Miller dealing with the knee injury. He's a guy that, was slow to get off the PUP list because of a shoulder injury. He had shoulder surgery in the offseason. So when I saw that he had a knee injury, I was like, oh, man, that's not good, just because he's the big left tackle. Andre James is dealing with a little something. He's the center, right? And then JPJ, I mentioned him. I'd be surprised if he even plays this week. So for the most part, I think that the Raiders are fine. Like, Brock Bowers is a full participant. I think everyone's good in that standpoint. But I am paying attention to Colton Miller, the big left tackle. You got to have that guy. As you know, the Ravens have dudes that can get to the quarterback, and you want to have all your stud offensive linemen, especially when you're trying to build some cohesiveness and just have that unit be one unit. They're not there yet. So if Colton Miller all of a sudden he goes down, that could be trouble in paradise. So hopefully Colton Miller will be okay. Obviously, we'll find out the injury report later on Thursday.
And those points you made, Q, we have been talking about those on that offensive line here in Baltimore for a while, especially after week 1. So, it's not just the Ravens fans. It's not just the Raiders fans. It's happening all across the league here. But coming up in the second part of the show, we are going to be diving more into the Ravens, talking about some offensive storylines, defensive matchups to look out for, and a lot more. Stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on this crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Raiders. First, the show is brought to you by DoorDash. And football's finally back, which means it's time to order your favorite game day food, snacks, and drinks on DoorDash without missing a play. So there are always game day essentials. I know for me, I have a lot of them, especially when it comes to drinks, food, snacks. I mean, even some extra batteries, right? You can't have that remote die on you. You got to have extra batteries in waiting, ready if something ends up happening. But there are the ultimate spread, right? We all love having spreads out. Maybe you're inviting people over to your place to watch the game. So that means you do have to have all the drinks, all the snacks, all the food. Got to get some dessert in there as well. You got to really get nuts with it. Plus, for the Ravens, if you want to compare them to a food or a game day essential, I like Tabasco because they have a little kick to them, and they're certainly a little spicy. But if you want to compare them to Old Bay for that Maryland flavor, I don't blame you whatsoever. Use promo code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 plus on your first order. Limited time offer. Terms apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites. Must be 21 plus to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. And this show is brought to you by Hims. When we leave the house, it's phone, wallet, keys. How's my hair look? But if you're experiencing hair loss, you may not be so confident when you step outside your door. It's time to get that confidence back and restore your hair with Hims. Hims provides access to a range of hair loss treatments that work all from the comfort of your couch. The process is simple and 100% online. Just answer a few questions. The medical provider will determine if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, the treatment is sent directly to your door. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, so if you feel like you're losing a part of yourself with your hair loss, get Hims and get your confidence back. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/LockedOnNFL. That's HIMS.com/LockedOnNFL for your personalized hair loss treatment options. hims.com/LockedOnNFL. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. We are back, our second segment of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Raiders here on Crossover Thursday. Kevin Oestreicher, Locked On Ravens, your boy Q of Locked On Raiders, still holding it down for you as we dive into some of the Ravens storylines in this week 2 matchup. And Q, you mentioned the offensive line has to be one of the bigger ones for this Ravens team on offense, as they've lost 60% of their starters. Kevin Zeitler gone. John Simpson, I know, former Raider friend over there, he's gone now in New York with Morgan Moses. So a bunch of younger players trying to step up on that line. Andrew Voorhees, who obviously, if you remember from the combine, tore his ACL doing drills and still did the reps on the bench press. Then you have guys like Daniel Falele, who was a third-year player out of Minnesota. Roger Rosengarten and Patrick McCary are kind of doing a rotation right now. And they had their welcome to the NFL moments against Chris Jones, who we know is one of the best pass rushers in this league. But it's not getting any easier with Las Vegas. It's not like, okay, Chris Jones is gone, we can now relax. No, you can't relax against guys like Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, and obviously the other players that Las Vegas has. So it's about protecting Lamar Jackson. It's about opening up rushing lanes for Derrick Henry. I thought that the Ravens used him correctly on that first drive that we saw on Thursday night, where they gave him 5 carries. He was doing his thing. The Chiefs had to cheat in on kind of what you were talking about earlier in the first segment, Q, with you kind of have to almost pick your poison, essentially, with Lamar, Derrick Henry. Who are you going with? Right. And the Chiefs started to go with Derrick Henry, and Lamar said, I'm just going to take this on the outside. I'm going to go right around you with blockers out in front. And then the Ravens just kind of got away from it. So I think getting into that identity more, into that look more, using heavy personnel. Mark Andrews was double covered, I think, the most in his entire career in that game. And the Ravens said, all right, well, we have this other guy for you named Isaiah Likely, who had 9 catches for 111 yards and a touchdown as that number 2 tight end. So I think Baltimore getting into their heavy personnel against this Las Vegas defense is going to be really, really important. And the rushing, I guess, volume for Lamar Jackson. He had 16 carries in that game in week 1. Henry only had 13. And John Harbaugh and Lamar kind of had different answers when asked about it and the sustainability of that. And Lamar said, hey, I don't want to find out if that's sustainable, because I think he understands that doing that over the course of a full season for any quarterback definitely takes a toll, not just Lamar. But then you also have John Harbaugh saying, well, there's not really fine lines between physical football and protection and whatever. So we're going to see how it all plays out for him. But I think establishing your run game early against Las Vegas, if you can do that, and not even necessarily having those big plays like the Chargers had, like you mentioned, but just consistently ripping off big runs. If they can do that against Las Vegas, it could put them on their toes.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt, right? And I do believe that you're going to see a heavy dose of, the run game from the Ravens. And, I'm really interested because, like you mentioned, Derrick Henry, that first drive against the Chiefs, I was like, whoa, Tennessee, what did you do? Like, why would you give this guy up? He's obviously still got plenty left in the tank. But then, as you mentioned, the Ravens went away from him, and he only had 13 carries for the game. Do you expect an uptick from Derrick Henry? Do you expect him to be closer to that 20 carry? I know Harbaugh said that he was never designed to carry it for 30 times a game. So, okay, that's fine. But do you expect him closer to 20 this week?
I think that, yeah, if the game flow goes the right way, and I pray it does, I pray it does, you might see 2025. But Harbaugh comes in there and says, hey, he's not coming in here to get 30 carries a game. And so I'm just like, okay, it makes sense to not have him with 30, right? Like that makes sense because 30 carries per game for Henry, that's a lot, and you don't want to wear him down. But if you brought him in to be in a platoon with Justice Hill, you shouldn't have signed him in the first place. You should have just brought back Gus Edwards because, again, we're in this age, Q, and I know the Raiders went through this with Josh Jacobs and what he got from Green Bay and kind of paying running backs. Well, the Ravens didn't give Derrick Henry the Josh Jacobs contract, but they did give him a decent amount of money for a running back in today's game. It was $8 million over 2 years per season. So 16 total, can go up to 20 with incentives. So to me, you bring him in to use him. And John Harbaugh, he's very he likes to use the tactical advantage. He doesn't like to give anything away. So him kind of telegraphing that kind of makes me think he might be going the complete opposite way and saying, this guy's going to get 28 carries in week 2, regardless of what happens. But they do have a lot of other mouths to feed, and I expect the Raiders to have to deal with a bunch of different offensive weapons for the Ravens here.
Well, one of the big weapons that they have and was on full display on Thursday Night Football against the Chiefs was Isaiah Likely, and we know what happened with the toe out of bounds. Regardless of that, he's a hell of a player, right? There's no doubt about it. He's an absolute playmaker. How much do you see him continuing to evolve in this Ravens offense?
Oh, I think it's going to be really fun to watch because I mentioned earlier with that heavy personnel, and I'll take us all back to 2019. We're a long way away from that. Don't get me wrong. But part of the reason that Lamar won his MVP that year, they were so successful on offense is they used even 3 tight end sets. So they brought in their heavy personnel, and kind of like what I was talking about with the defense cheating up on Derrick Henry. Well, that season, the run game was so historically dominant that they just had to load guys in the box, bring in their heavy personnel. And what they would do is after they had success running against you, they would just work play action off of that. Right. So the teams were cheating up. They were sending guys in the box. And then you had guys like Mark Andrews who would just run by you and have a slower linebacker on him because they were trying to stop the ground and pound. And then that would make it work. But outside of Andrews, it was Hayden Hurst and Nick Boyle. Hurst was solid, not anything great, but he was solid. And Boyle was more of a blocking tight end. But Isaiah Likely is this like hybrid tight end. You can put him out wide. You can put him in the slot. He has uber athleticism. And I think over the course of the season, what gives me a lot of encouragement for him is the past 2 years, Andrews has had to miss time with an injury. And He has stepped in, and the offense has not missed any beat whatsoever. So in my opinion, it feels like as the year goes on, we're not going to see what happened in week 1, I feel like, because Kansas City's game plan is kind of just, we're taking your best weapon out and there's nothing you can do about it. Go beat us somewhere else. And the Ravens like, okay, we have all these other guys. But I think that for Andrews and Likely, they'll be able to work in tandem together, and that'll be a really big part, hopefully, in this game for the Ravens.
So the offense, obviously, we kind of have an idea of, what we're going to be looking for in this game and how Baltimore has a plan on attacking the Raiders. On the other side of things, when it comes to the defense, and, it's hard to determine how good a defense is when you go up against Kansas City week 1, right? I mean, it's just they're so good. But how do you feel the defense, is right now and where they're at? I mean, obviously they got playmakers on that side of the ball, but just, how close to being, I guess, rounding to midseason form are they right now?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And especially to the point where you have a first-time defensive coordinator in Zach Orr, who is going to be going up against, Davante Adams is one of the best receivers in this league. Obviously, they had their hands full last week with Kansas City. You're exactly right. Whereas a first-time defensive coordinator, first-time play caller, that's a pretty tough test for you. But again, you're going to have to go up against talented playmakers as well, like a Davante Adams. So I think, to me, the defense right now, they certainly had their fair share of struggles, but they also held down things when they needed to. This game easily last week could have gone and been 21-7 before halftime. The Ravens had 2 pretty bad turnovers, one on a strip sack, one on a 4th down play, and the Chiefs could have gone up 21-7 with 2 touchdowns, but the Ravens held it down, 2 field goals, tightened up in the red zone. It was 13-7, much more manageable. There were miscommunications, there were bad personnel decisions, there were a lot of things that you expect out of a guy calling the game for the first time, and players being in a somewhat similar defense, because Mike McDonald and Zach Orr, they still have the philosophies, but it's always going to be new when a new guy comes in. So as the year goes on, it is going to get better, but we're still in kind of the early stages of that. So I wouldn't be shocked if we do see a couple of mistakes here and there from this defense, but all in all, they're in a pretty good spot. Kyle Van Noy suffered an eye injury in week 1. I wouldn't expect him to play. I expect him to miss some time with that. So it's nothing. It is an orbital fracture, so you're not messing with that. Other than that, the Ravens injury report, pretty clean overall. Roquan Smith limited with a shoulder injury, and then Adisa Isaac, the rookie pass rusher, limited as well. But other than that, they're fully healthy, ready to go for this one. So on defense, having their stars is really important.
Roquan is a dude. That's all.
Yeah.
Roquan is a dude. When he became available, when the rumors were even out that he was available by way of Chicago for trade, I was like, man, who's going to get him? And then when Baltimore made the move, I was like, of course they would. Why wouldn't they? Right. With that being said, with Roquan being that dude, how much of a loss has it been not having Patrick Queen? I know it's only 1 game, but Patrick Queen now in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I think that they'll be just fine. And Patrick Queen, among all former Ravens, actually had the lowest PFF grade out of all of them. I think it was 28.8. So depending on how you feel about PFF, everybody watching or listening, you can take that either way you want to. But the Ravens have Trenton Simpson, who I think will be able to step up and perform. He did in week 1. I thought that he had a lot of really good reps. And again, as the season goes on for him, he'll be able to get in there. Queen is somebody that obviously played really well next to Roquan. They had chemistry. It was great luxury to have, but they had to choose one or the other, and they obviously you choose Roquan 10 times out of 10 in that situation. Queen goes to Pittsburgh. He's taking on the villain role in Pittsburgh to Baltimore to say, I'm coming for Baltimore. Even when as far as to call it the food in Baltimore, it's like it's a whole another level about we're not even talking football anymore. We're talking about the city. But for Patrick Queen, I think with him now gone, big year for Trenton Simpson ahead, and I really expect them to to make things roll with him and Roquan in the same defensive linebacker core. But we have lots still to get to here on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Raiders. Coming up, talk about predictions, more about those Davante Adams comments, things to expect from Gardner Minshew, Lamar Jackson, and a lot more. Don't go anywhere. Lots to dive into here on this crossover edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Raiders. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, and I love FanDuel. Heading over there and seeing what they have to offer. We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. If that's not enough, be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's double your winnings for all of Sunday. 9:15 pregame moneyline bets. Profit Boost will be live starting Thursday, 9/12. View your account page now to learn more about your boost over the Ravens and Raiders game. They open up, the Ravens do, as 9.5-point favorites. So if you like them, if you like the Raiders even, head over to FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook. Crossover Thursday, Locked On Ravens, Locked On Raiders. Kevin Ostreicher, Locked On Ravens, your boy Q of Locked On Raiders, still hanging out with you. This episode, Crossover Thursday, Locked On Ravens and Locked On Raiders, is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Now, Q, I'm really interested because with these Davante Adams comments, obviously this is the huge, like this, I know for Raiders fans are like, oh, really? Come on. But this is like the hot topic. Like everybody in Baltimore is talking about it. And I just, from the outside looking in, obviously me covering the Ravens fans and everything, there's a certain perception of Lamar. But I think outside of Baltimore, there's another one where I think some people obviously love him. Other people don't believe him. There are all these different types of viewpoints on Lamar. And so for a guy like, again, a star in Davante Adams coming out and saying what he had to say and all this high praise for Lamar Jackson, I mean, it means a lot to the fan base. It means a lot to the city. Like it's a big deal whenever somebody comes out. So I'm trying to, contextualize why it's so important. But again, he said, dude changed the game. He's the best ball carrier ever, no matter what position. I don't think anybody's as big of a threat to carry the football. For you in particular, what do you feel Lamar Jackson is at this point in his career? What are your feelings on him from the outside looking in, from a Las Vegas perspective? What are your opinions on Lamar and what he's been able to do, not only over the course of his career, but how he's been able to, as Davante Adams said, almost change the game in multiple different ways?
I think I'm probably higher on him than a lot of people on the outside. I really am. I'm a big Lamar fan. I think he's fantastic. I echo pretty much the words that Davante says. I might not say that he changed the game, but he is just such a dynamic player and, a really good quarterback. And I know there's some people that say he's a running back that plays the quarterback position. I don't sign up for that. I believe that Lamar has a hell of an arm. I know that he could throw a bunch of touchdown passes. He's been there, done that. A lot of folks need to check the receipts on that. And it's funny because after the Ravens lost week 1 to Kansas City, all I heard about, nationally, locally, whatever the case may be, even involved in conversations of, well, Lamar can't this and Lamar can't do that. And I'm thinking he went up against Patrick Mahomes, right? And there's a reason why there's dudes in the NBA like Karl Malone and John Stockton and Charles Barkley, and the list goes on and on and on of guys that don't have rings, right? Because they got Michael Jordan, right? I mean, that's what I like to call it. They got Michael Jordan. Patrick Mahomes is basically Michael Jordan. So it's so funny. I literally had a conversation locally and nationally about Lamar right after that game. And I said, look, he might not be Patrick Mahomes. He might not be on that level, but he's not far below, right? And there's only 32 starting quarterback positions in the league. And every team that does not have Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, maybe Josh Allen would take Lamar Jackson right now. And I'm very confident saying that, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, again, Mahomes is Mahomes. Like we can all admit that Mahomes is Mahomes. But Lamar is very firmly in that second tier. I mean, I personally believe he's the second best in the league. I know there's a lot of viewpoints about Lamar, Burrow, and Allen, 2, 3, 4, however you want to order them. But man, I mean, it seems like every star that comes out and has stuff to say about Lamar, including Davante here, it's a big deal when comments like this are made. And I know, him saying this about Lamar and saying literally like, hey, he wanted to get better in certain aspects of him in the open field and whatnot. He said he was watching Lamar Jackson's highlights at his locker and trying to get better before games with those. So again, really cool comments from Davante. But Q, this game for the Raiders.
Yeah, just Lamar, have a bad game on Sunday. That's all.
No, I'm not going that far. I'm not going that far. But I think that this it's crazy because this is a game that the Ravens actually kind of like really need, because if they start 0-2, especially look, the Raiders, they're not a team that's expected to be this like top Super Bowl contender or anything of that nature. I think they're still a solid team, but they're not in that like top of the top. So if the Ravens lose this game, I think it's going to be all panic in Baltimore. If the Raiders win, you feel really good about that if you're Vegas. But for Las Vegas in this one, Q, what are 3 things you think they have to do in order to secure a win?
Well, I mean, one, they've got to be able to run the ball. They have to be able to run the ball. They were not able to run the ball effectively on Sunday versus the Chargers, and it limited everything that they wanted to do, right? I mean, they're 12 personnel that they want to play in. They weren't able to do that very often. I mean, it's just that the matchups wasn't there. They weren't able to utilize play action, right? And more times than not, the Chargers, their defenders, Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, were able to just pin their ears back and try to get to the quarterback. This offense will not run correctly under Luke Getsy without the run game. You have to be able to run the ball. And Zamir White has an opportunity to fill that void now that Josh Jacobs is gone, and he started out really slowly to the point where they put Alexander Madison in to take that point. And he did a really good job. So Antonio Pierce has told us whoever has the hot hand is who's going to have the ball. Like, he's going to ride that hot hand until, he has to switch it up. So first and foremost, they have to 100% all capitals have to be able to run the ball. If they can't run the ball, it's lights out. It's just not going to work. The Ravens defense will be able to, like I said, pin their ears back and look for Gardner Minshew and go after him. And it's just that simple. It'll be a one-dimensional team, and they're not built like that. 2, they've got to be able to put a fence, some kind of fence around Lamar Jackson, right? I mean, there's got to be some kind of again, discipline, dedication to not allowing those, off-script plays to happen when those big breakdowns in defense. All of a sudden, everyone's running, with the wide receivers, and they turn their back to the quarterback, and all of a sudden the quarterback's like, well, hey, here's some grass. Let me go take it. And then all of a sudden there's a huge play. Like, they've got to be so disciplined when it comes to the way that they try to rush Lamar. Like, you just can't do like normally, like you'd be able to pin your ears back, and you always want to have contain. But sometimes if you don't really have that contained wall out there, you feel okay about it. This ain't one of those games. This is not one of those games. You cannot, just not have those contained walls up. You really have to be disciplined in your pass rush. You just have to. And of course, stopping the run goes with that as well. I mean, really, the defensive line, that line of scrimmage, the Raiders have to do everything they can in their power to really own it. And they did a good job against the Chargers for, like I said, 3/4 of the game. So that's a big priority. And I think, honestly, the Raiders have to create a couple turnovers. You got to get a couple turnovers to get the offense a shorter field. This Raiders offense is not clicking on all cylinders. They only scored 10 points last week, so they need as much help as they can get, right? They need to be able to make sure that maybe Gardner Minshew and that offense gets the ball in plus territory, or they get it, closer to the 50-yard line as opposed to getting it at the 20 and having to drive the whole distance of the field. Create a couple turnovers. Hell, maybe even the defense could score a touchdown or whatever, get into the end zone or return the ball and set them up in scoring range already. Just, they've got to get some kind of juice and energy, and they're going on the road. It's an early kickoff for them, 10 a.m. Pacific time kickoff, so they've got to be able to adjust, but I think that would give them some extra juice if they're able to create a couple turnovers. So those are the 3 things that I'm looking for. You got to run the ball. You've got to be very disciplined in the way that you rush Lamar Jackson and create a couple turnovers, and that will give you a chance to get a victory in Baltimore. Not saying you're going to win, but you're going to get a chance to get a victory in Baltimore if you could at least do those 3 things. For the Ravens, what do you think? What are the 3 things that they need to do to get away with the victory and improve their record to 1-1?
Yeah, I think first of all, you got to block. You just have to block effectively and efficiently, both in the run game and in the pass game. Derrick Henry didn't have a great game on Thursday night. Part of that was because they just didn't run block effectively, and you had a guy on top of him. And Derrick Henry can do a lot of things. Stiff arm guys out of the way, move them out, said, I'm taking this ball to the end zone, but he can't do it all the time. He has to be able to have free rushing lanes, get himself going, and that will help. Plus, for Lamar Jackson, again, you want to have him be able to feel comfortable in the pocket, go through his reads, and be able to deliver strikes, especially with the offensive talent they have. You have to be able to block effectively and efficiently for what Lamar Jackson wants to be able to do in this game, especially if you get your run game going. And I think that's the second thing, which is just establish that early. We had seen the Ravens do it on Thursday night, but then they went away from it. And by the time they felt like they could do it again, it was already too late and the game flow had already changed. So for them, being able to dictate the game flow themselves on offense, establish that physicality, win the point of attack on the offensive line, and make the Raiders defense guess, make them try to cheat up and commit to something and then do the opposite thing. And I think that is it's the action that the Ravens have to spam. You have 3 or 4 different options out of a couple of specific heavy looks that you can do and make really successful, especially in this game in week 2. And then finally, for the defensive side of the ball, just take away an aspect of the Raiders offense. You know, if you want to take away Zamir White, now Alexander Madison do that. I know Zamir White had a tough debut, and Madison was kind of the guy who, especially in the pass game, kind of got going for him. If you want to try to take away Davante Adams in that passing game, Gardner Minshew, make him uncomfortable, you can. Last time Gardner Minshew faced the Ravens was able to win the game in Indianapolis, but Kyle Hamilton had 3 first-half sacks, and they got him going early. It was kind of that ugly mop-it-up game. So I think for the Ravens, if they can establish something early and just take something away from Las Vegas defensively for them, that's a really, really big part. Q, I have the Ravens winning this one. I have them going somewhere along the lines of, I'll say 31-20. That's kind of what I have. I think the Raiders are a good team.
A lot of points there.
I know. I think that this is like the bounce back game. Like they're pissed off about that Chiefs loss. To me, I'm going 31-20, but I could see it going a couple different ways.
I definitely don't believe the Ravens will score that many points. I think the Raiders defense is better than that. I actually believe that this defense could be really strong. I'm not 100% confident saying that I think that the Raiders are going to win. I know that they need this victory. Nobody wants to start out 0-2, just like the Ravens don't want to start out 0-2. But just for the sake of this show, and I'm gonna go out on a limb. I'm gonna say that I'm gonna go ahead and say that the Raiders are gonna win. But I think it's gonna be a low score. I think this is like 20-17. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like this is one of those games, right? Let's put it like this. I'm not even gonna say the Raiders are gonna win. I'm gonna say the final score will be 20-17. How about that? 20-17 will be the final score. And I hope that it comes out on the Raiders side of things. I really do. They only scored 10 points last week, so I'm a little gun shy to say that they're going to make sure to score 20 just because that's doubling what they did a week ago. But I'm just going to say that the final score will be 20-17. I think it's going to be low scoring because I think both defenses are going to show up. How about that?
Q is awesome. Really appreciate him hopping on here, giving us the inside scoop on the Raiders ahead of week 2. And even though we kind of crushed my Davante Adams dreams a little bit, we will have to check back with him at the deadline because, man, there's what incredible comments by Davante Adams. You absolutely have to love it. That's all I have for you here today, though, on this episode of Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out on YouTube. If you're on the way out in audio form, be sure to hit that follow along button. Almost to 8,000 subscribers on YouTube. Really love for you to be a part of our journey in audio form. That community is building every single day. Would love for you to be a part of that community as well. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be rounding out the weekday episodes with more Ravens coverage, continuing to preview that Ravens and Raiders week 2 matchup. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.